questions that was asked during a one of the pictures I put out asked the question, what do you guys want to hear us talk about? And there was a thing that came up a lot that we kind of wanted to touch base on. So let's get into it. What I want to talk about today is the term transmisogyny. This is a term originally created by Julia Serrano and talking about essentially what looks to be a very special way of engaging with trans women. That is the simultaneousness of being sort of inappropriate towards trans women because A, there's the disgust towards trans people because people are dumb, but also because there's a way that our society rejects the feminine. And so if you're a AMAP person who identifies somewhere in the fem range, then yeah, things get rough. So let's take a look at what she has to say, because I think this will give us context into our discussion with our guest in a bit. Oh, that didn't do it. 1 second. There we go. Fixed it. Wait, no, I didn't. Why isn't it doing thing? Oh, because game capture's on. Oops. Why isn't it working? Oh, because I hit it. I'm silly. Anywho, here's what Julia Serrano has to say about it.
The basic argument I made in Whipping Girl goes something like this: what feminists have long called sexism actually consists of two forces. There's traditional sexism, which is the notion that femaleness and femininity are inferior to, or less legitimate than, maleness and masculinity. But in order to maintain that hierarchy, there also needs to be a way to discourage people from blurring or traversing these distinctions. I called that force oppositional sexism and defined it as the belief that female and male are rigid, mutually exclusive categories, each possessing a unique and non-overlapping set of attributes, aptitudes, abilities, and desires. In other words, transphobia, as well as homophobia, stem from oppositional sexism.
Yeah. So the idea here is that there seems to be an intersection between traditional sexism and the notion of oppositional sexism. The idea that there are two opposing forces, masculine and feminine, and as such, this leads to really bad outcomes. Because at least Julia's argument is this is why, despite the fact that all trans people get harassment, full stop, I'm not reducing anything that happens to NBs or trans men, this is why trans women are a large part of the arguments and a lot of part of the discussions, because there's a way that we demonize femininity. So she says here, Excluded, Making Feminism and Queer Movements More Inclusive was my second book, published in 2013, in the chapter Reclaiming Femininity. I discuss transmisogyny, specifically pages 49 to 53. While much of it reiterates points I made in Whipping Girl, I do include two anecdotes that I feel are especially illustrative of the phenomenon and how it intersects with anti-feminine sentiments. Here are those particular passages. So I'm going to play these trigger warnings for particular sexism or transphobia, okay? If I can actually highlight the damn thing. There we go.
I love our
I have found that many people who have not had a trans female or trans feminine experience often have trouble wrapping their brains around the concept of transmisogyny, so I will offer the following two anecdotes to help illustrate what I mean by the term. Once, about 2 years ago, I was walking down the street in San Francisco, and a trans woman happened to be walking just ahead of me. She was dressed femininely, but not any more feminine than a typical cis woman. Two people, a man and a woman, were sitting on a doorstep, and as the trans woman walked by, the man turned to the woman he was sitting next to and said, "Look at all the shit he's wearing," and the woman he was with nodded in agreement. Now presumably the word shit was a reference to femininity, specifically, the feminine clothing and cosmetics the trans woman wore. I found this particular comment to be quite telling. After all, while cis women often receive harassing comments from strange men on the street, it is rather rare for those men to address those remarks to a female acquaintance and for her to apparently approve of his remarks. Furthermore, if this same man were to have harassed a cis woman, it is unlikely that he would do so by referring to her feminine clothing and makeup as shit. Similarly, someone who is on the trans-masculine spectrum could potentially be harassed, but it is unlikely that his masculine clothing would be referred to as shit. Thus, transmisogyny is both informed by, yet distinct from, transphobia and misogyny, in that it specifically targets transgender expressions of femaleness and femininity.
So the point here is that if we look at this term, what we're really referring to is this notion by which cissexism, transphobia, by the combined of those things, somehow seems to create a new phenomenon. And there are those in the radical feminist category who say they deny these certain things. Those people are idiots. Let's move on. The simple fact with this is, and the reason why I wanted to bring this up, is that every female streamer, right, gets shit. Inappropriate comments, people asking really weird shit. Lots of really kind of fucked up stuff gets said to a lot of female content creators. But you'll notice that it becomes much more toxic and much more problematic when we're discussing trans women. Because, and this is not to reduce cis women's experiences, what this is to say is that because of this intersection of phenomenon, there is a way in which, because the feminine is considered inferior and because transness is seen as bad, you are this intersection of quote-unquote bad things. This is why one of the things that I think gets brought up a lot is that you'll notice that when people are usually going after non-binary people, almost universally, not always, but almost universally, they will always go after AFAB NBs. You ever notice that? I rarely hear conversations about AMAB NBs. In fact, most AMAB people I know who are trans tend to become trans women and then come out as non-binary later. Now, that could be anecdotal, but from what I've seen within the trans community, this seems to be a trend. And I think there's a reason for it. Now, we can argue socialization and various other things might make AFAB people more willing to kind of play with spectrums and things like that. Doesn't matter. What matters is that every time the conversation gets brought up about non-binary people, it subtly seems to hint at this issue. Not in the same way that trans women get, but if you notice, with the Irreparable Damages book, with the shit that J.K. Rowling's been going off on about, like, you know, girls being forced to transition and all these other lies and bullshit that woman spews out of her face, all of it, by definition, is almost this protective mechanism. It's like pseudo-chivalry. We have to protect our girls. They're just too dumb to know not to transition. Like, it's kind of fucked, because what it essentially does is you're using sexism from a different angle. You're telling AFAB people they don't know themselves because, sorry, little girl, you don't know what you're talking about, which is incredibly reductive and shitty. But with trans women, the system tends to be much more direct. The belief that female and male are rigid, mutual exclusive categories, and by attempting to be female, which is the inferior, and by being trans, you are essentially being the bad thing. The reason why I think this is important to recognize is that I think that this... So, relation to transphobia, let's check this out real quick.
Transmisogyny is a distinct category of transphobia in that transmisogyny mainly focuses on trans women and other transgender individuals who demonstrate femininity, whereas transphobia is a more general term, covering a broader spectrum of prejudice and discrimination towards transsexual and transgender individuals. Julia Serrano states in Whipping Girl that the majority of jokes made at the expense of trans people center on men wearing dresses or men who want their penises cut off. That is not transphobia, it is transmisogyny. When the majority of violence and sexual assaults committed against trans people is directed at trans women, that is not transphobia, it is transmisogyny.
Trigger warning, by the way. So, be clear about this. Notice that whenever people talk about their disgust with trans people, they are almost universally talking about the things that trans women do. We literally ask trans women, what's between your legs? This happened when, I believe it was Katie Couric, asked that of Laverne Cox. The issue here with this is that to some degree, while each member of the trans community has a different story and a different experience, all of them are equal and all of them can be actively shitty, this seems to be a very real, almost intersection, almost singularity of two very big things. Being trans is bad, and being a woman is inferior, and as such, you are less than good. This can actually be demonstrated in the gender critical video that Contra did. She mentions in it that, you know, if a guy sees you and goes, "Oh, dude, wait, that's a T-slur," it's not like they just say, "Oh, sir, please go to your destination." They treat you either as it or spit. Because you're not even regaining, with the misgendering, your masculine privilege. It's still gone. Even if your identity is invalidated. This is the bitch. Even if your identity is invalidated, you still are a target. You still are less than. So you absorb all of the shitty things of sexism and the aspects of transphobia. And this is why I think this is important, because whether we're looking at the way Demon Mama gets treated in fucking arguments, or the way that Contra gets a lot of shit online for being, she's more style than substance now. She's just being feminine. Go fuck yourselves. Her videos still have plenty of substance. She's still doing the same amount, and half the time she's not drinking as much. Calm your shit. So the reality of this turns into a problem where trans women exist in this incredibly weird threshold of, we're not allowed to be too feminine because apparently that thus feeds into the transmisogyny. But if we're not feminine enough, then our gender gets ignored, but we still are reduced as a social being. To me, I think this really matters and really is a big deal, because this is in no way an attempt to devalue or ignore the things that our NB friends or our trans brothers go through. It's to point out the fact that there's a very special intersection because of the way society has been. The biggest thing here to remember or understand is, where is it? So, in Whipping Girl, Serrano writes on what she calls a predator-prey dichotomy, where men are invariably viewed as predators and women as prey. Because of this view, trans women are perceived to be luring men by transitioning and turning themselves into sexual objects that no red-blooded man can resist. Does that sound familiar? Emily, yes. Femme is performance of weakness, and not just performance. You're choosing. In this case, they believe the trans person is choosing this in some way. Yes, and masculinity is the default. How men are almost always the people who are doing shit. Like, God, look in medical training, things like that. A lot of stuff is defaulted to men.
I mean, we've seen that with, writing, right? Growing up being told that he is the default, right? And
Which is kind of fucked.
That is absolutely fucked. And the silly part is that people have been introducing like gender neutral pronouns for decades and decades, and this just gets ignored. Yeah.
What I will say is, I forget what that was said. I believe it was Danger Fairy said, trans women for those using the disaffirming. So I will say this, I fuck that up all the time. I'm not gonna really. It's gonna be a context thing. If somebody puts the two together.
Oh, space versus no space.
Yeah, space versus no space, because there is a difference. So
I mean, I'm not gonna die on that particular hill. The thing is with a lot of the language in the LGBT stuff is that a lot of this stuff is shifting.
Oh wow. Brittany said, my intersex diagram talked about excessive breast growth, underdeveloped beard, feminine characteristics, just assuming they are bad men. Holy shit.
Wow. Oh god.
That actually goes a lot with the that also goes a lot with the notion of what was it? If you ever watched the TED Talk by Emily Quinn, I know I've talked about it in the stream before. I think that's a really, really good discussion point. But yeah, I want you guys to take and understand this because, we're about to talk to a guest who this happened to. This happens to all of us. Trans women on the internet, and I'm not saying this doesn't happen to everybody, but trans women on the internet receive a very specific type of hate. What I'm told I'm doing to my body is mutilation, which it's simply not.
Yeah, I was going to say absolutely not. Going just to appointments and seeing her light
Annie,
up.
What I'm going to do is probably bring you into the waiting room, so just be online and ready, okay?
Where's my phone at?
So, my point with all this is really simple is, hey, I think it's really, really important that we consider this stuff. And I want to go over this more because, and this is the TLDR of this. The left is guilty of this a lot. And they don't know it. Organic Fucko says, this connects to my thoughts on the Marcus video because his using a scenario of a trans woman being bad and then denying her identity, showing how he can't process bad people being women. Fucking true, Organic Fucko. Fucking true. Holy shit, that's such a good point. I hadn't even considered that.
No, that's a... Yeah, no, you
get the gold star for the day.
You are absolutely getting gold stars. Yeah.
All right, so I am going to end this here, but we are going to go into this more deeply in the future. But I wanted to cover it because I think this is a big deal. I think people don't talk about this enough, and because it took Demon Mama, myself, like a Kotaku article and another fucking article to essentially, I assume those were the things that pushed Annie to get back online, mine being the least. The fact is that if that happened, like if it took that, why? Was it just that we put enough pressure on Twitch? I don't know. But why didn't they want to do anything to begin with? Something to consider. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also ring the bell if you want to be notified of our videos. If you want to help the channel, you can donate at streamlabs.com/transgirltherapist/tip. You also can become a patron at patreon.com/transgirltherapist. For as low as $3, you can support our channel. Thanks for watching.